Kia ora koutou, Markie here. So this video is one in the series that we have on survivors of sexual abuse, or anyone interested in that area, that field. And there's a playlist, so if you want to check out the other videos. So I've got one video, for example, on what does recovery from childhood sexual abuse look like. Should you forgive your abuser, stuff like that. And I want to talk today about arousal confusion. Now, I'm a psychotherapist, as many of you will know, and I like to use videos as part of the work that I do. I do a lot of education within my work, and I work in a number of different specialist fields, one of which is retroactive jealousy, as you can tell by the name of the channel, but some other specialisms as well. So I went to find a video which I had watched on YouTube before about the subject of arousal confusion, and it was good and quite helpful, and I went to try and find it again. Somebody else was asking actually, and I couldn't find it, so I don't know if it's been taken down or if it's just not available, which is a shame. So quite often when I can't find a video by somebody else about something, I make one and hopefully fill the gap. So this is one of those videos, and obviously I'll put my own take on it. I don't recall word for word what that YouTube creator said or how they presented it. So when I'm talking about arousal confusion, so what I mean is, and bear in mind, trigger warning here, you know, I'm going to be talking about something that's not nice, you know. It's part of my work, so I become very familiar talking about this. I sometimes forget to give things like trigger warnings, but you know, if you've got a history of childhood sexual abuse, you know, think about whether this is something that you want to watch now. You know, are you in a good space to watch this now? So, assuming that you are and you're still with me, what I mean by arousal confusion is when somebody is the victim of any form of sexual abuse, someone is inflicting non-consensual sexual activity upon another person. Sometimes, although you know the whole thing can be massively traumatic, and I've done a whole video on the effects of this stuff, and believe me, they're big and wide-ranging and long-lasting. Although you know it's horribly traumatic, it's, you know, it can be frightening, it can be humiliating, it can be, you know, a whole range of things that ain't good, ain't nice. Sometimes physical pleasure is derived from the abuse, and I'm not talking about the abuser. I mean, obviously the abuser, the abuser may or may not experience sexual arousal. Sometimes sexual assaults have another purpose in the mind of the abuser, which might be more about sadism or more about control. I'm talking about the victim. Okay, so people can get aroused when they're being sexually abused. And when I say aroused, I'm going to spell everything out in this video, okay, because I think sometimes you have to. So when we get sexually aroused, number of things happen in the body. Physiologically, some are kind of quite obvious, some are less obvious. Obviously, the biggest sexual organ that in both males and females is the brain. But also, even if you know the brain is saying no, the genitals can sometimes appear to say yes, but they're not saying yes. They're just doing what they're designed to do. They're designed to give you sexual pleasure. Okay, you know, if you think about it, if you think about the clitoris, for example, there is no other recognised purpose of the clitoris than to give feelings of pleasure. Okay, so why have we got that? Is that because God is kind and generous and wants women to have a good time? Probably not. It's an evolutionary thing. I've said in other videos, sex is pretty gross. You know, like most children depending on what age they are, just the idea of kissing is really disgusting to them. And if you think about really what sex involves, it involves putting our bits and our faces in areas that are hairy and smelly and oozing with fluids. And actually, I don't think genitals generally look that nice. Some people like that. They like, people that are very visual. They like looking at genitals. But for me, it puts me off my breakfast, actually, for most cases. So we wouldn't breed if there wasn't a very strong reward. And so, and breeding is also, is a dangerous thing. In a primeval environment, if you're making love, it's a good time to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something. Nearly said a saber-toothed tiger then. Now, I'm already losing my voice here, which is, I need to get some water, which is a problem I've talked about in other videos. I've actually got a medical issue, which I want to get resolved, which means that I can't talk or sing or use my voice for very long at all without it kind of gets very dry and I get lots of throat problems, so bear with me. So, okay, now I'm going to pull all these threads together if I've lost you already. So, we have bits in our bodies that are designed to give us pleasure when they're stimulated, and if we didn't have those bits, we probably wouldn't be here. As a race, we would have died out, because as an individual, there's not much actual reward for having sex. In fact, it's probably not that helpful for an individual to have sex in a primal environment, because it makes you vulnerable while you're doing the sex, and then when you've got the children, you have to look after the children. And that strains your resources and makes you even more vulnerable. But collectively, it's good for the species to continue, and there are evolutionary advantages of living in community. So as an individual, sex, not good. As a species in a community, sex is very good. So how do you persuade individuals to have sex? Well, the people who enjoy sex the most pass on their genes, and therefore our bodies now they're all our ancient ancestors, and we have inherited the capacity to be aroused, excited and pleasured during sex. Okay, and some of that can happen whether we want it to or not. Okay, so during a rape or a sexual assault of any kind, even if there's no touch involved, and sexual abuse can not involve touch. Sometimes sexual abuse is where somebody forces or coerces the other person to touch them, or sometimes sexual abuse is completely hands-free. Sexual abuse is an adult showing pornography to a child. That's sexual abuse, no contact. Okay, it's still sexual abuse. Or sexual abuse is an adult talking dirty to a child or talking about sexual topics to a child. So it can involve touch, it can involve, not involve touch, but the brain being a sexual organ as well, and the brain gets confused. So there's things that are exciting as well as things that are terrifying and horrible and yucky. It's a real mix. This is why sexual abuse is such a horrendous thing, because it really confuses the victim. And one of the big things that confuse victims is this arousal confusion. So let's talk about men in this instance. I mean, more women are sexually abused than men, but I think men are often left out of the picture. And I work closely with an organisation that's all about supporting men who've been sexually abused. So, young boy, let's say 14, being sexually abused by an older man, doesn't like it, but is unable. Doesn't have the resources or the escape route in order to get themselves out of that situation, but they get aroused when it happens. Okay, so what happens is a guy thinks, oh my God, they start to experience guilt. They think, well, I must be partly to blame for this abuse because I got an erection. I was going to talk about what arousal is. So arousal isn't just an erection. Arousal is kind of a whole range of stuff happens in the body. One of the things that happens is lips become engorged, which is why we like kissing. This is why people lick their lips. when they're feeling sexy. It's one of the reasons why probably women have coloured their lips over the centuries or millennia, because when lips become engorged, they become more red. And all kinds of things happen with the body. There's flushing. There's sometimes like an increase in heart rate and things like that. And in men, there's the erection. And in women have erections too, right? Because the lips of the genitals become engorged as well. So basically, an erection is just when more blood flows into the penis in men, and also the lips, and it flows into the genital lips in women. And then of course there's orgasm, which is the climax of the sexual experience, which sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. So all of these things can happen, I'm talking males and females, in a sexual abuse situation. If that happens, does that mean that you're not really being abused, because you're enjoying it, and therefore you must be complicit? You must have, on some level, you're consenting to this, even though you've said no, even though you've tried, you've fought, you've done everything you can to stop it from happening. Or maybe you can't do that because that's not safe to do. Or maybe you go into a freeze mode, which is something that often happens when people are being abused. So people struggle with this for years, and this is what I hate about. I hate lots of things about sexual abuse, but one of the things I hate about sexual abuse is often the perpetrator feels no guilt, and the victim comes away with a whole kind of complex of guilt. And this is why these things, the trauma from these things and the headfuckery doesn't go away. Often doesn't go away on its own. You need help to deal with this stuff. So that's what I mean by arousal confusion. So arousal confusion, if when you're being sexually abused in any way, and there's a broad spectrum of ways that people can, that one person can, or a number of people can sexually abuse another one, doesn't necessarily involve touch, but if there's any form of arousal and any form of pleasure that comes from arousal, does not mean that you're in any way to blame for what happened to you. Okay, it just means that the physical parts of your body that are associated with sexual pleasure are working properly, and they got triggered by something sexual, which is what they're designed to do. Okay, so it means just that your body's doing what your body's supposed to do. And the other side of this is the perpetrators of sexual abuse sometimes use arousal confusion as a justification. So the kind of the rapists kind of there's lots of, among people that sexually harm other people, there are a lot of cognitive distortions, we call them. So basically, nobody wants to think of themselves as a horrible rapist. No, nobody says, I'm a horrible rapist. People will rationalise and try and find ways to justify their behaviour, which is why you get all this nonsense from people like, well, she was asking for it because she was wearing a short skirt. Okay. And one of the cognitive distortions, one of the rationalisations that's used by sexual abusers is, well, it wasn't rape because she enjoyed it, because she orgasmed, or because she was. That's the other thing that happens with I should have said with arousal is lubrication. So the vagina becomes more wet and produces a mucus, which acts as a lubricant. So the sex is more easy, less painful, all those kinds of things. So they say, oh well, she was wet, she was engorged, she orgasmed, delete as applicable. None of those things go anywhere near justifying a rape, and they mean absolutely nothing. Okay, so if you know anyone that comes out with this kind of crap, don't have a bar of it, as they say in this country. So that's the two sides of arousal confusion. Now the other side, another thing which I'll throw into the mix here, I won't charge you any extra for this, is particularly among children that have been sexually abused over a long period by an abuser, sometimes children will initiate the sexual activity with the abuser. And that's another thing. I think, well, I started it sometimes. You know, I went to the abuser and sat on their lap and did blah blah blah, or that. There's a song lyric. I've done lots of videos on song lyrics, but particularly from a band called All About Eve, who I think are just one of the best, most poetic song lyrics in the world of music. And they've got a song called Supper Time, and one of the lines in there is, "Poison on my plate, so hungry I ate." Okay, so what this is about is often where sexual abuse is taking place, particularly if it's by a caregiver or somebody that's a family member or somebody that's close to the abused, which is often the case. Those victims are in a state of abuse, of neglect. Sorry, so they're not getting all the love and attention that a child should get. And what they kind of quickly learn, and this is tragic, is that they do get the attention and the love that they're needing when they're providing a sexual service for the abuser. Okay, so they don't want the sex. They might think they want the sex, but a child can't consent to sex. Even if they find it pleasurable, then you can never blame a child. You can never blame the victim. The only person responsible for sexual abuse is the sexual abuser. But even if a child initiates a sexual abuse, they might experience some pleasure for it. So what? They're too young to consent. They're confused. They've been groomed. They wouldn't even be thinking along those lines had they not been abused. And 9 times out of 10, if they initiate sexual activity with the abuser, it's because of the other things that they should be getting as a child from the caregiver, and they're accepting the sex as part of the package. And I think sometimes that's what happens. So you do get, it happens with men and women, but I think probably more often with women who get older, is sometimes they think their only worth is for their bodies and their sexuality. They think that's the only thing that people are interested in. And they try and meet their needs for a relationship, for community, for acceptance, for approval, for love, by being promiscuous, and they get judged and shamed for that as well. And obviously there's risks associated with that. That often is one of the long-term effects of sexual abuse, is that people think, well, that's all people are interested in is my body. I'm just a masturbatory aid, and if I give people what they need to get off, then they'll like me and they'll look after me, or they'll love me, or they'll, really sad, So I think I've covered everything there. I've been very blunt, but I think sometimes it's good to be blunt. So just to kind of sum up, it doesn't matter. Particularly if you're a child, okay, children cannot consent to any sexual activity, okay. So even if a child does say yes, they can't say yes. They legally and morally, they do not have the capacity. They don't understand sex and the complex nuances of it. A child cannot consent to sex. So even if a child initiates a sexual activity with an adult, which happens occasionally, even if they derive physical pleasure from activity with an adult, they are in no way to blame for that. And children that have not been abused or inappropriately sexualized in some premature and inappropriate way, would not even, that just wouldn't happen. That just wouldn't be part of their life experience. So it's always the responsibility or the fault of the adult in that situation. And for people that have perpetrated sexual harm to other people, if that other person appeared to be physically aroused in some way or other, that does not mean that they really wanted it. They were saying no when they meant yes, and they just needed you to kind of facilitate that decision for them by forcing them. You know, that is just complete self-delusion, self-justification. And you know, please, you know, kill this myth. If you hear this myth perpetuated anywhere, please, you know, shoot it dead in its tracks, because it needs to be shot dead. So if you're the subject, the victim of any form of sexual abuse, whether as an adult or a child, it's not your fault. Even if you took risks, even if you know, wore, well, it doesn't matter what skirt you wore, it doesn't matter if you were naked, you know, unless you say yes to sex, and unless you're old enough and mature enough and have the capacity to say yes to sex, if somebody perpetrates any form of unwanted sexual attention upon you, it is entirely their fault. And remember that, you know, child sex abusers, that the whole act of grooming is also an act of gaslighting as well. So if you've been molested as a child, then there's a good chance that, you know, your brain has been molested as well. Your sense of reality has been tampered with and distorted, and that takes a lot of work to unravel all that. So you are absolutely fine, okay? There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing bad about you. You just need to get the help that you need in order to start to recover and feel good about yourself. And the only person that's at fault is the person that does the abuse. Thanks for watching. Rangimarie.